Welcome to the Newcomers Podcast, where I explore what it means to be an immigrant with immigrants like myself. Today, I'm chatting with Ritika Saraswat, who's a huge advocate of international students. Like, we talked about a ton of things concerning international students, but I think that, if you decide that after listening to this intro, you want to go away, I think here's the one thing you should take away from this episode. Your immigration journey is in your hands, honestly. It's all up to you. You can decide to feel like a victim, or you can decide to say to yourself, I'm going to take control of this conversation and do it myself. And that's the way to approach it, honestly. Because I love what she said in the episode where she talks about how, as a student, as an international student, when you're coming here, you need to, one, be very clear about why you're coming here. And then two, you need to always play the long game. Always. Enjoy. Let's get to it. Seven years, you know, international student, now working, all the changes. Like, if you think back at the Ritika who moved to Canada 7 years ago, and you think back to yourself today,
Yeah.
what would you say to the lady that moved here 7 years ago?
Oh wow. Actually, I've thought about that a couple of times, but I think never really gone too deep into the thought. But I think if I think back, when I first came in, what I would say is that you will figure it out. And the reason I will say that is because I would even say that to every international student coming in, right? And whether that is someone who's moving from another country or whether it's someone moving from one city to the other, because I think when we talk about the international student journey or the immigrant journey, is not just for people who are moving countries, in my opinion, right? The extent of the experience, the extent of the change may vary based on are you shifting countries or cities, but I think it's still familiar and similar in the kind of uncomfortability that you may experience initially, the loneliness and all of those things that come along with it, right? And I think the biggest takeaway or realization I've had is there are always going to be ups and downs, I think, which is similar to everyone in life, but I think you have to just trust the process, and you have to be willing to commit to the process of not being led in a certain direction, but being willing to drive the direction you want to really move in, which requires a lot of effort. But I think as long as you're willing to do that, I think everything you envision turns out to be true. So it's just about having patience and knowing that you are going to figure it out.
I feel like that is advice any immigrant needs. Like, you will figure
Mm.
it out. Because I feel like when you move, and you're right, like, whether you moved across cities or you moved
Yeah.
to across countries, the difference is just like how much of a shock you get. Like, maybe in a
Yeah.
city is like, oh, I can at least fly and go see my parents. With the countries, like, gosh, I can't fly because I don't have the money to fly home.
Yeah.
But that stress is there. And that thing you said about you will figure it out.
Mm.
As long as you're alive and you're breathing, you will somehow figure it out.
Yeah.
But I think the thing that the caveat there is that thing you say about you need to make sure that you're the one driving the conversation. You're not being led. I
Mm.
think that's the thing, especially as an international student, is that you come here and you're not sure of what's going on. You're not sure of
Yeah.
what's happening, and I don't know. You just if you're not careful, you just find yourself in lanes that you don't understand because you're scared, you're worried,
Yeah.
you're trying to survive. You know.
Yeah, and I think like a lot of it is, how do I say, it's like you haven't walked a path before, so obviously you're going to be hesitant about it, right? It's with everything in life. And the reason, I kind of bring it to even every person experiences is because I feel like we have isolated the immigrant experience, not realizing each one of us experience the same thing, just in different forms and ways. And that allows us to really empathize with individuals who are going through that process by realizing that, wow, I've been through it as well, and I would have wished that when I went through it, people people would have supported me in XYZ ways, right? The only caveat here is now you have individuals who may speak different languages than you, like look different than you, right? Come from different backgrounds as you. So I think having that kind of outlook to realizing that, wow, they're just like us, but and have been through the same challenges that we have gone through, but maybe worse, right? I think it really creates that empathetic part, which is what I've started emphasizing on as a narrative, to really not make people feel it's us versus them, or it's this
Oh
versus
yeah.
that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that you say that, and that's just part of why I'm doing this, because I say to people, the immigrant experience is the human experience. That's what
Mm,
I call it. It's there's no and it's the human experience. And again, just continuing on that, is that the us versus them doesn't help anyone. It
yeah.
We just create barriers that are don't help anybody, because yeah, different languages, different cultures, and all that. But the
Mm,
immigrant experience is the human experience, because once you understand the immigrant experience, then you empathize, and you also start to see that you've actually felt some of those things before, maybe in different degrees,
yeah.
but you felt it, and these people are just experiencing it maybe at a more intense degree than you
Yeah.
felt it, that sort of thing. And gosh, I like that. Like, I really like that when you say that, honestly, because for me it's a big thing. That's we need
Yeah.
to we're not different. We're just like going on different journeys. That's just how I say it.
Yeah, and coming in with different motivations, and
Oh yeah.
wanting to, just like everyone else, wanting to make our parents proud, wanting to really give it our best, to give life another shot, right? To give ourselves another shot to make it happen, right? Whatever that may be to anyone, right? So I think we're just trying, right? So I think the whole
Yeah.
idea is, how about we just let each other try, and
Mm.
let capability then dictate who gets it or not, but at least create space to welcome people who want to try.
Gosh. Yeah. Let's just try. Yeah, let's just try. I mean, just kind of building on that, and just something you said earlier on about the process and stuff. Like, if you think
Mm,
about, again, I'm sorry, I'm just staying on the then and now. If you think about all the lessons, all the things that happen to
yeah,
you now, cultural shocks and stuff. Like,
yeah.
are there some of those things you're now used to, and what are those things, and what are the things
Mm,
that you still haven't yet fully settled into? They say it takes 10 years for you to fully integrate into a new society. I think it
yeah.
takes more, but they say it takes 10 years to settle. So what
Mm,
I'm kind of asking is, if you look back at when you landed and the things that
yeah.
hit you in the face culturally, what are the things that you've gotten used to? What are the things that you're like,
Mm.
I'm still kind of struggling with those things 7 years after?
I think it was less about, oh, am I used to it or not? But I think it was more of a surprise, or something I did not know about when I first came in, that I realized that Canadians are just very sweet. And I think sometimes when they're speaking to you, they may not say what they really feel. Like, even when you ask people for feedback, or when you even ask people, to be honest about how they felt when you spoke to them a certain way, or based on the conversation or a discussion that you had in any scenario, you'll always get a very vague response, because they're trying to be diplomatic, right? And you don't really get to the meat of what really needs to change, right? So, and I feel like I went about my first year, whether it's at the workplace, whether it was in university, thinking, wow, I'm incredible at everything that I do, or just thinking like, oh, maybe, like, there's nothing wrong at all, right? And that's when I was like, wait, I want to improve though. Why am I not getting suggestions on how I can make that happen? And I realize it's a bit of a cultural component, where you also have to switch around how you ask the question, and maybe even make them comfortable knowing that if they are to share something that may be thought of as critical, that is something what you're actually looking for, because that is what's going to help you improve, right? Giving surface level feedback is not going to do it for you, right? So
Yeah.
when you put them in a position to let them know that the way they can help you the most is by being honest with you about what the real situation is, I realized that's what allowed them to feel comfortable to being more honest more vulnerable, more authentic in general. And that really helped me, even from a workplace perspective, because I see a lot of immigrants when they enter the workforce here struggle a lot towards understanding what's going wrong, what really needs to be improved, and saying that no one really says anything because you have to nudge it a little bit. So I think that was something that was really like new, and I was like, oh, I didn't know about this. I think one another thing that I'm not still able to get my head across as much, I would say, is I think obviously in India where we come from, I think we have very community driven cultures, right? Collectivistic cultures, versus here it's more individualistic. So your neighbors not talking to one another. Even like when you see an old person crossing the street, very rarely do you see that kind of thing amongst people to be like, hey, why don't I help you cross the street, right? Like I know I've done that so many times in India, and I've tried to do it here, but sometimes I have people getting offended at me when I do that. So that's something I'm still getting used to, because my culture in me doesn't allow me to just stand there and not do anything about it. So I'm like,
I
I'd
feel
rather get
you.
scolded at, but not do anything.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, when I landed in Ottawa. I struggled with that a
Mm,
lot. I would see older people on the road, and I would be like, "Good afternoon," and they would ignore me. Like they would just keep moving, and I'd be like, what's going on?" Like,
yeah.
Calgary is a bit different, though. People talk respond here more in Calgary. You greet them,
Mm,
something to respond to you, but still, you're right. It's that culture thing. I want to go back to the first thing you said and just ask, like,
yeah.
how do you make them comfortable? Like, because I feel like I want to learn that too. Like, how do you make people comfortable enough with you to tell
Mm,
you what they feel? Because yeah, in Canada, no one will say anything to you, and you just keep bumbling on and going, and everyone just keep quiet. And then someday,
mm.
you either get fired or you hear from someone else that your boss doesn't like what you're doing, and you're like,
Yeah.
why didn't you tell me? Like, so how do you get
Mm.
them to feel comfortable to tell you how they feel?
I think it is, honestly, even now I'd say it's a work in progress, because it depends leader to leader. It depends on who you're working with. It depends upon the company culture as well. Some companies are more open and believe in the feedback process, right? So they'll have specific systems in place where they'll say, hey, when you join a company, make sure when you're on a project, you set up a call maybe with your manager once every 2 weeks, just to reconnect and understand how things are going. And they maybe give you certain guiding questions. So it differs from company to company and what kind of a space they're creating for you and for that leader, to even make it clear to them that this is something that's important for us, right? This is something that will help the company grow. And the way you can do that is by being honest with these people, right? The second thing I've realized is similar to networking as well, a little bit, right? At a general level, is really understand the individual you're working with first. What's their leadership style? How do they prefer to give feedback, right? Do they also like receiving feedback, right? If yes, how do they like to receive it? Because maybe you also you can tell them, hey, you can give me feedback in a similar way, right? So I think asking more questions, trying to understand the person, and even when you're not sure, I've realized even asking them directly, right? I've said this to a leader once. I said, no one's telling me actually what's wrong, and I know there is so much more I can improve on, right? And if there's nothing to improve on, well, promote me now. And but if that's not happening, tell me exactly what the issue is so that I can actually work on it, because I know I have the capability, I have the potential, and I want to go from point A to B. But unless and until you help me fill in the point A.1, A.2, A.3, I'm not going to know how to pave that path. So the way you can help me the most now as a leader is by giving me that direction, right? So I think when you make it an honest conversation, I think people are willing to kind of enter into that uncomfortable zone of giving you feedback. And also your reaction when someone gives you feedback also makes a difference. If you are reactive, you know to feedback, people are going to stop giving it to you. That's just general workplace culture, right? But if you're someone who is very understanding of that feedback, takes your time to digest it, and is not like, oh, but no, that happened because, oh, I did that, it was not because I was really not paying attention, like, if you make up excuses, then people don't really want to give you feedback, because they're like, what's the point, right? So I feel like what you do after feedback is given also influences whether someone will keep giving you feedback in the future or not.
Yeah, that's really that part of just two things you said now, like the how you
Mm,
when you were rounding up, be really good. Like the point on just just taking it in and just not reacting to it, like just
Yeah.
not saying anything, or just basically, okay, I've heard you, I'll try and do it this way or that sort of thing, but don't give an excuse, and then just asking directly. I think those are pretty really helpful
Yeah.
things.
And I
Yeah,
think showing them what's your plan to action, right? What I will do sometimes when my leader gives me feedback, I'll say, you know what? That is so true. I agree with it. And I said, I've noticed it as well. And I said, I don't know if you noticed, but I actually changed the way I approached this situation the second time that we met, right? So I'll even show them how they may not realize, but I've already started making a difference in that direction, right? So I acknowledge it. I show them already what's my plan to improve in that area. How have I been doing it, either on their or someone else's project? And what can they expect from me moving further also? Right? So that way the person feels, wow, okay, this person is not minding it at all. Let me be very honest, let me help them grow. Right? So that's when I think you really change that kind of relationship. And these conversations that we are having, are actually most important when we talk about people not just getting a job, but when we also talk about people staying in a job, right? And we
yeah.
don't talk about these things as much. People constantly talk about resumes, cover letters, etc., all
Oh
surface
yeah.
level things,
Oh yeah.
which everyone's doing, right? So these things are where I've seen people get removed from the company also, because they just don't know how to navigate these conversations, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that point about surface level conversations, I feel like it affects most of the immigrant conversations. We talk about the things that are the checklist things,
Yes.
get a house, apply
Mm,
for this, do all that,
yeah.
th- fix your CV. I mean, all those things are, I feel like they're easy to solve. They're the harder things, like understanding the culture, understanding nuance, understanding what's said and what's not said, and reading in between the
Mm,
lines, knowing when
yeah.
to shut up, knowing when to talk, knowing when
Yeah.
to, knowing just how to manage yourself in the process. Because I feel like one of the biggest things we struggle with as immigrants is the fact that we come here and we've lost all of our social capital. And so we
Mm,
have to kind of start from ground zero again, building
yeah.
social capital. Hmm.
No, and I know, I think, but what I always say as well is, see, coming abroad is a choice, right? Unless obviously you are a refugee, and I think in those cases you're forced in many ways, to move countries, and that's a different situation. But if we talk about the majority of international students, let's say, and immigrants we have coming in, are coming in by choice, because they want to build a better life for themselves, they want to build a better life for their family, right? And when we make that decision, we have the ownership, to also be responsible for, no, take the ownership of being responsible for what we do with our life there as well, right? And why I bring that up is because sometimes I feel like we have a lot of people have this tendency to go down the victim mentality, to be like, oh, I
Oh
moved here,
yeah.
it's been so difficult. But yes, you made the choice, right? No one forced you to. So now when you have made the choice, I agree things are difficult, I agree things can be tricky, but it can so be for someone else as well, right? There are people who have it worse than you, right? But the point is, how do we figure it out now? There's no harm in creating awareness, there's no harm in being an advocate for your experiences, but using that to get access to opportunities by using the victim mentality, I think that's also wrong, right?
Yeah, I
So I
agree.
feel like having the right perspective is very important. And if I also go back to the first question that you asked, in terms of one of the things that you said, what was something else, Ritika, you realized about the culture, and like, you have understood now? I think another thing is, in India, people always have this notion that you work hard and people are going to notice it and you're going to get access to opportunities. But I think coming to North America, I realized that is not how things work. Right here, you don't get a job or you don't get an investment in your startup just based on you having capabilities, because there are thousands of people out there who all have capabilities on paper. They all have incredible resumes. They all have incredible degrees. Today you even have more people graduating with masters than you did a year before, right? But despite all of that, why is there unemployment? Well, it's because, what people in North America value is credible visibility, right? Which means you just don't need to have credibility. People also need to know who you are and what you bring to the table. And that requires us to adopt practices we aren't that comfortable with or
Mm.
know of as much, like networking, like personal branding, like using platforms like LinkedIn, right? So that was the other piece that I feel like I've understood really well now. And obviously, how you keep doing it will change over the years depending on the role you're in, but it is definitely an essential component.
Oh yeah. So it's like it's a thing that I think one thing about immigrating is you can to add to that is if you've packed your life into two suitcases, then you've done the most insane thing, adjusting
Mm.
slightly, or just trying to understand how the system works so that you can fit
Yeah,
in. I think like that's not as crazy as what you did by already moving to a new country, because you're right, it's a choice. You made the choice, and so there's no need to start trying to play the victim for when every single
yeah,
thing happens, because integration is a two-way street. You have to put in the effort too. Like, you can't just say, oh, Canada has to accept you. I'm like, you have to
mm.
accept Canada too, and you have to put in the effort to understand the country, because then that's
Yeah,
how you make the country better. You don't make the country better if you don't know anything about it, or if you don't care, or if
mm.
you say the country must bend to how you see the world. Like, I'm
Yeah.
like, that is you being rude and all that stuff.
And I think the simple notion to think about it is like from an employment perspective, right? Any company, when they're hiring you, even though you're grateful that a company is hiring you, at the end of the day, they hire you only when they see a potential ROI for themselves. The
Yes.
same is with any other country bringing you in, right? Now, if you were to even reverse roles, where let's say if India, as an example, were to start receiving people coming in, right? Or let's say like some other place like Afghanistan was to start receiving people, I'm sure for each of those countries, now it would be them thinking critically and strategically, okay, what are the kind of people do we need, what will
Hmm.
really help our economy, what are the kind of credentials we need from these individuals, what are the kind of social capital we want these, or the brain power we want these people to bring in that can eventually help us. That's the same concept that's being applied here, right? So when we are willing to upskill ourselves, learn so many things for a job, right, we have to understand it's kind of the same process when you come to a new country as well, right? Because even they are in a position of choosing you based on what will help them fill the gap. And when you are someone who does not fill the gap, just as in any job, you become replaceable, which means it's easy for someone to tell you bye bye, you know you can go back, right? Versus when you create irreplaceability, which involves you to do a lot of research, truly understand what that country wants, truly understand how your skill sets really fit that gap, and even choose a country on that basis, right? A lot of people just move abroad, especially to Canada, without really thinking of any of that, which is why they have challenges. Because if you even look at, about 95% of international students who come to Canada come for business degrees. And Canada does not need more business people, right? That's the reason why you see high unemployment. And why is this? Because, well, you have certain bad actors in the space who are sitting there to influence students and guide and misdirect them or guide them in wrong directions, because even students are not taking out the time to do some of that research. And it could be because of multiple circumstances on their end. So I give them that benefit of doubt. Right. So I think it just makes that situation worse of having someone who's unaware combined with someone who's misguiding them, which leads to a wrong decision and eventually leads to that student living a life which they are overqualified for, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I agree. I mean, although I would add though that,
Hmm.
I mean, the point I would add to what you said is that I feel like there's always a balance.
Yeah.
Where we always have to be careful that the immigration conversation doesn't turn into an economic unit conversation. It's
Yes.
in the end, it's a human that is in the loop. It's a
Yeah.
human in the machine. It's a human in the loop, not a machine in the loop. And so
Yeah.
there's that balance between understanding what the country wants, but then also being treating the immigrant like a human being. So I think that's the balance. But
Absolutely.
since we're already in your favorite topic, international students, I mean, let's no, yeah, because you talk about that a ton, and I'm like, I think for me, since we're already there, is the past 1 year has been just pretty interesting in Canada. Like,
Mm.
if you're an international student planning to come in or here already, like the past 1 year has just been all over the place. And from your perspective and with all the work you do with international students, what do you think all these immigration policies? I mean, today we got a new immigration minister. I mean, so like all these changes, like what if you were going to advise an international student on what to do, what would you say to them today? Like, what would you say
Mm.
to them? How should they approach Canada immigration today?
Mm. I would say, irrespective, and I think it's a two-part question in my opinion. One
Okay.
is, what's the impact these changes are having on people today who are
Yes.
already here in Canada? What I would say is, from my experience, at least with the students in our community, even through our events when we're interacting with them one-on-one, I feel like people are just becoming a lot more aware and a lot more smarter, all the students. Where now I'll tell you that obsession that they came in with, that I'm in this country for a PR, that's changing amongst a lot of students, right? Because they are realizing, and now you have a lot of advocates on LinkedIn. Like, when I started advocating for this, I felt like I was one of the very few people talking about how you don't need to obsess over a PR, and how you come in this, to really just learn from the country. And if you get the opportunity to give back to this country, great. If not, take it back to your country and give it back there, right? And I feel like now you see more and more people advocating for that, and you see that impact even in students right now. When I have students showing up, so many of their work permits are expiring, so many of their study permits are expiring, but they are relaxed about it. They said, Ratika, you know what, it's fine if it's expiring. I'm going to leverage all the time that I have here, build all the right connections, get the right opportunities while I'm here, right? When I'm in India, I could run a business and I could be working with people internationally. I said, absolutely. That's the perspective we got to have, right? Or they think, you know what, even if I have to go back, I'll come back again on visitor visa, right? And then maybe figure it out again. So I feel like, yes, there was an initial time of hopelessness and people really feeling demotivated and really feeling lost, because I think for the longest time, the purpose of immigrants and international students has been told to come to a country and get a PR. But I think now, even for the people who are coming in, they aren't coming in with the drive that I want a PR from this country, but they're coming in, you know what, I'm here to learn, and I want to see how can I learn as much as I can and use it to build something of my own, right? That's the difference in shift I am seeing recently among students, which is so empowering to see, because that's what I've always wanted them to be like. You don't have the dependency, and you're not changing your career paths and routes just because of that one thing. And you're seeing that changing. So I would say that's very liberating. And that in turn, I think, is impacting the kind of students you also have coming in. With a lot of the restrictions and other things coming in, that's already filtering out
Yeah.
certain types of demographics, which is allowing us to really get to people who really either are filling in the gaps, of the Canadian economy, like quite from a direct perspective, but also students who are here to learn, right? Who are not here necessarily to stick around. They are like, oh, if I can stick around, great. If not, that's fine as well. Right? I came in with the same opinion. All my batchmates came in with the same opinion. My work permit is expiring end of this year, but I am super relaxed. I've submitted my application, but I'm like, if it happens, great. If it doesn't happen, that's totally okay. I'll start a business in India and we'll figure it out, right? So I think that's the difference I'm seeing.
Oh, that's lovely to hear actually, because yeah, it's been such a year where
Mm,
it kind of feels like, and I think what has really hurt me a lot, and which is why I talked
mm.
about having the human in the loop whenever we're having these
Yeah,
conversations, is at some point it felt like people were blaming international students for everything.
yeah,
Oh, the how, like, and I'm like, come on, like,
yeah.
guys, like, people, please, can we're talking about a human being here who decided to come to Canada for various reasons.
Mm,
Maybe it didn't work out, maybe it worked out, but like, the all the bashing doesn't help
mm,
anyone. It almost felt like it became a Canada versus the international student kind of conversation. So hearing that and hearing that that's becoming a thing,
yeah.
it's is gratifying to hear. Although I
Mm,
would say the worry is that Canada has a brand positive immigration thing around it, and
mm,
if people start having those views, don't you
yeah.
think that ends up hurting Canada in the long term? Because people stop seeing Canada as a place where you can go to and
Mm.
become an immigrant or a citizen or a member of the community. If Canada starts to get the image of a place where you just go, learn, and then move out of of the
Mm.
country.
I think it's already impacting Canada, right? You already see immigration rates reducing. Yes, because of the Canadian enforcement and like the different kind of practices they have set in place. But beyond that, even in people's attitudes, right? Now you don't see every person like before. Let's say if you ask in classes, because I was in India as well last month, doing a few sessions across universities, colleges, and even from that perspective, now in a class when you ask students, hey, which country do you want to go to? The number of people raising their hand for Canada has reduced a lot than it was before. And why do you notice that trend? It's because the kind of social media posts that are going out there. You see a lot of people emigrating back home, right? And it's also because, I'll tell you, our origin countries have also transformed a lot in the last 4 to 5 years, right? So when we as individuals are going back, we are like, wait a second, this is insane. The country has grown so much, right? There are so many more opportunities here. So I feel like, yes, it's creating that negative perception, which is impacting a lot of businesses here, which is impacting a lot of immigration consultants who are based out of here, who have those businesses. You see a lot of institutions shutting down. I know Seneca shut down one of their campuses. You've seen so many other colleges do the same, right? Which in my opinion is a good thing, right? Initially, because we are in that position right now where we have a surplus of people in this country, and if we start bringing more, it's going to do worse for the people who are already here, right?
Yeah.
We still have 1.5 million international students, and I think I forgot the exact number, but we have almost 5 million work permits, I think, expiring by the end of this year, which is an insane number to think about, right? So now when you think about that, before we bring anyone new in, I think the first conversation we need to have is, how do we improve the quality of life of people who are already here? Because to your earlier conversation as well, yes, we've always thought of students from a metrics perspective, right? Every conversation has been about how many number of students are we bringing in,
Yeah.
what degrees are they doing, what courses are they doing. It's never about, okay, and specifically towards Indian international students, I even see a lot more hate in general than otherwise, right? And maybe it's because we are a lot more in numbers, right? But the one argument I always make is, just because a demographic is more in number doesn't mean their quality of life is also better. And if you start going into the specifics about the percentage of students working at part-time jobs or service jobs or labor jobs, it's a lot more higher students, international students, and a lot more higher Indian international students, right? Versus if you compare better jobs like corporate job, etc. So those are also stats, if you start looking into, you realize, wow, these numbers themselves are not giving us information around how the overall immigrant community is doing, right? So it requires us to start using better assessment metrics, to really see how we are assessing success for an immigrant in Canada, right? Irrespective of the country they come from, what does that really look like? Is it when they get a job, or is it things beyond that, right? Because now a job could be a labor job versus a job
Mm,
in an industry that the student wants
yeah.
to get into, right? So it's those small pieces as well, I feel like we really need to drive into. And none of this conversation would happen if we didn't go through this challenging time of the last year. So I think I'm actually even grateful for that time, because it requires us now to, it puts us in a position to actually think about, how do we change this.
Yeah. Yeah. Damn. And you're right about that. Gosh. Because oh, it's been such an interesting year, and it feels like when I think about the numbers that
Yeah.
are being put out, the numbers are answering the question.
Mm,
And I'll say this, is that it's not a popular thing to say, but it's answering the question. When politicians are looking for someone to blame,
mm,
then the numbers are designed to
yeah,
fit into that narrative. So it feels like that's what we've done, is that we've basically just scapegoated people. That's all we've done. We've just scapegoated people. The easiest people to
that's the
scapegoat
easiest thing
usually,
to do.
yeah, immigrants. Instead of asking, like, how do we solve this? Okay, this is where we are right now. Like, do
Mm,
we don't need to call, like, yes, there are bad actors. There are
yeah.
bad across the spectrum. Like, there's no need to that's a rant, sorry.
Mm. No, 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 no. All good. And I would say, I think the biggest thing in these situations is, for any new person wanting to come in as well, I think just be aware. Do your research. Really think about, is this the right country for me? Right? Really think about, what does this country have to offer? Right? Does it align with what I'm looking for as well? Right? Before you even make the decision to move somewhere, I think that's very important for you to do. And I just don't mean an hour of research and you're done to make that decision, right? I mean connecting with people on LinkedIn who are based out of that country, talking to them. If you're planning to go to an institution, connect with someone in that institution to understand, hey, do you have your courses online, in person? How is it done? Are your professors of good capability and credibility? If not, don't sign up for that institution, right? Because I think that's the biggest problem I see. See, everyone coming in is incredibly smart, but I don't want them to trust anyone else except for themselves. And that requires us to do the research, put in the work ourselves, and then find these other people who can act as those middlemen to navigating that process, right? So I think that first part needs to be done. And that's why, I always bring everything back to the conversation around the why. What's your purpose? Why do you want to come to Canada? And I'll tell you, the most shocking thing is, I've asked this question sometimes to a lot of parents, especially, who have moved with their kids here. And I asked them, you had a settled life back home, right? What made you move? And they want to have an answer to that question. And once I asked this to a mother, and she thought about it quite a lot, and she said, oh, a better education for my daughter. So I said, does back home, is there no good education? She said, oh yes, not that there isn't good education. So I said, then what is it? What is it? She's like, but it's just better. I said, is it? She's like, actually, I don't know now. And I said, this is how did you make all of this decision, move your entire life, your husband's life, right? Your kid's life, risk so much just because you thought it's better, right? And it may be surprising for people to think that how are people moving their lives just on that basis? Well, it's because it's a notion that has been engraved in our minds from a very long time, right? If I even talk about back to the Indian context, I feel like a lot of it is coming from those years long ago when we were even under the British rule, right? Where we just thought moving abroad or going somewhere means it's a better life, it's a good thing, just automatically we imagine, right? Even if you come here, you do a labor job, we just think it's better than working back home. Is it
Yeah.
really though? The amount of money you take back home based on the taxes, the cost of living here, versus if I compare it back home, it's actually the same if you think about it, right? So it's like, are you even looking into the specifics? And then when I say that to people, they're like, wait a second, I didn't realize. I said, yes. So, like it's just very interesting, you know?
Yeah, it is.
Um,
I mean, so I think sometimes like you're right, people don't spend time to ask themselves like, what am I moving to do?
yeah.
Why am I moving? And is this country the place where I can do what I want to do? You know, and what do I want to spend the rest of my life doing? And how does this country fit into that?
Mm.
But yeah, the immigration journey is just a really interesting one.
Yeah. No, I think it is interesting. And I think, like, sorry, maybe I'll let you go on to the next question. Otherwise, I'll keep rambling.
No, 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 no. I'm enjoying this. You're trying to say something. Sorry.
No, no, no. I think I was just gonna say, I feel like every time I feel like I have a conversation, and maybe this is changing over the years, right?
Okay.
Like I'm the big. I would say personally, I would say I'm a very big advocate for international students, immigrants, us making the moves. And I think, but we have to realize it is a two-way conversation, and we have to realize, yes, it is not one person who's responsible, one individual, one entity. We have to realize while it's the country's responsibility to also make sure they create this space for us and treat us as humans that we are, it is also our responsibility that we do our part of coming in well researched, we do our part of setting a good example for other people from our community. Because I'll tell you, that's what I've seen creates misconceptions, which in turn lead to stereotypes, which in turn lead to discrimination, is
Yeah.
when a few members from the community take advantage of the situation or the opportunities they have been given and do things that are not right, which 100% exist and happen, right? Which
Yeah.
then leads to other community members from the community suffering as a result, right? So I think we as individuals also have to take ownership. I have spoken to students also who will come in and just tell me, Ritika, oh, I'm not getting the time to find a job, and still yet complain to me about how they're not getting a job. And I said, why do you not have the time? Well, I have a full-time course load, Ritika. Which is why, well, I said, even I had a full-time course load, I even had a part-time job, and I even had an internship, but guess what, we made that happen, and we still networked with people, right? So I feel like there is that piece where I also want to push students to take that ownership because they have such high potential, right? But I don't think we're living up to that potential sometimes, because it's easy to come in and just say, oh yeah, it's difficult, that's why I'm not getting it. No, there are people who are still getting those opportunities, right? I think
Yeah.
Canada can be a land of dreams if you're someone who's willing to be resilient, if you're someone who's willing to put in the work. to make
Yep.
things happen, right?
Totally agree.
And willing to get up. It's not going to be as easy as it is back home. I'm not saying it's easy back home. It is difficult, but it's a lot more difficult here because you don't look like them, because you don't speak their language, because you don't come from the same culture. And obviously, they will favor their own people first. Makes sense to me if I put myself in their shoes, right? So the latter part of it is then make yourself so worthy enough that no one can tell you a no, right? People see you and your capability, and they lay down the red carpet for you saying, please do enter these spaces, right? So we can make that happen, right? It's just about, are we willing to make that happen, and are we willing to put in the work to make that happen?
Yeah. This is a good place to end it, but I have one question for you. Like, is there anything I should have asked you that I haven't asked you yet about international students?
mm, I don't know, is there anything else you're curious about?
I think for me is if it honestly feels like
Mm,
you've given up. It feels like you've. I feel sad a bit inside because I feel like you've given up on Canada a bit. It feels like that. Like I get the sense that you're like, okay, this country isn't exactly doing what it should do. So it kind of feels like you've given up, and that's heartbreaking to see. Just because I feel like countries like this, people come in here and make it better, and and like people say make it better, and because that's like when you become a citizen, they
mm,
say make it better, but then the country exactly is not. I mean, the past couple of years or so, it feels like it's not exactly like you're right. It's not doing everything it does to for you to help them make it better. I mean, because that's why you want an
mm.
immigrant to come in. But just looking at you talking and stuff, I'm just like, has she given up on the country?
I don't think I've given up on the country. I feel like I never came in with expectations either,
Oh, that's
right?
beautiful.
Because I'm someone who lives on my own terms. I know if I want something, I will make it happen. If I want a PR, I'll make it happen. If I want to get a job of X income, I'll make that happen. If I want to start a company, even though I don't have a PR, I'll make that happen, right? I'll figure out ways on how I can do that, right? So I think for me, it's always been about what can you control versus what you cannot control. And I
Mm,
always go back to that thing, irrespective of whether you're an immigrant or not. Because I've realized, see, at the end of the day, what each one of us is striving for is to create success for ourselves. No country defines that success for you, right? You can be successful in Canada, you can be successful in Ethiopia, you can be successful in India, you can be successful in Afghanistan. And as long as you're achieving your metric of success, I don't think you'll have a complaint in what country you achieve that success on. So
yeah,
for me, the point is, no matter where you go, make the most use of your opportunity. Try to learn as much as you can from that country, build as many connections as you can, get to know the top 2% of that country, so that even if you are to move anywhere else, you can start and build something of your own that allows you to still maintain those relationships. And in fact, guess what? Make money in dollars and spend it in INR. Isn't that a better situation, right? So for me, it's less of the lost hope, but actually I'm more excited because I think it has created these amazing opportunities for people. And I think it's opened a realization for a lot of students because of some of these challenges in coming to the country and staying in the country, which has pushed them to really think beyond that obsessiveness that they've had for the longest time about what this means for them, right? And about what this means for their future. And now their future is not limited to a geography, right?
yeah,
Which I think for me is very empowering to think of, because now you're not dependent on any one entity or country to make certain things happen for you, right?
yeah.
So that's when I feel students are in fact getting liberated. I know it's going to be inconvenient. A lot of people are going to have complaints, but trust me, I know at the end of the day, they're going to be grateful for everything that happened, because they're going to be like, thank God I didn't limit myself to that.
Thank you.
I know, a very different opinion, but I don't know. I feel like
Oh,
I've
it's
just
a.
realized that.
Oh, I think it's a beautiful one, honestly. Because I think that just I think the core of what you're saying is
Mm.
that is to that statement you made about focus on what you control, not what you can control. Because that's
Yeah.
really it. You can't control the immigration minister's policy. You can't control what the country does, but you can control how you label it. You can control your opinion of it. You can control what you act. So you're not reacting, you're just acting, So
Yes.
so I think in the end, like that's really it is in the end, the power is in your hands, honestly.
Yeah. Absolutely. No, it is in your hands. And then, no, and I think you touched it very well, is like even with the PR process, right? If you want a PR, put in all the effort you can to get that PR, right? But now again, when you do that process, because I know that's the narrative a lot of students use, that, oh, I went down the LMI path because I wanted a PR and I know that's what will help me. And I gave up that job at TD Bank or wherever, right? Because of that opportunity, right? In those moments, I also tell them, again, going back to the decision making matrix, think about what's your long term goal versus what's your short term goal. And sometimes the biggest mistake we make is we let our short term goals um, dictate our ability to achieve our long-term ambitions, right? If your long-term ambition is to create a life where you make x money, let's say, or are in an x position, if you end up compromising that goal by giving into your short-term goal, which is to get your PR, right? And sometimes to get that PR, you're willing to go down any path that's needed. And let's say if you now start working at Tim Hortons, get that LMIA, be in that PR process, it takes you a year to 2 years to do that. By the end of those 2 years, you're already so far away from the industry that you actually wanted to be in, that now you don't find yourself being able to even catch up with the people who are already in that space. As a result, you find yourself staying in the network you're already in, and what you thought of as a short term decision now becomes a long term opportunity for you, right? And now you're just caught in and it's difficult to get out, right? And that leads to dissatisfaction, and that leads to people emigrating back home, right? And so many more things. So I feel like it all just comes down to, how are you making the decision, how are you thinking about that decision, and why are you making that decision, and does it align with your long term vision? If all of those are yeses, great, make the decision then, right? If no, then I want you to think about it 55 times before you say a yes, right? So that's the difference, I would say.
Gosh, I'm gonna end this here because I don't have anything else to say. That was so, gosh, like that was so interesting because, did you get the sense that, like I did, like she's like, I don't care, I'm gonna make the best of the situation. And I think that's so beautiful, because you know what that means? It means you're not desperate. But yeah, thanks as always for getting to this point of the episode. As always, like, share, subscribe, follow. If you know someone we should talk to, send them our way. If you know someone who finds it useful, send it to them. Thank you so much. Peace out.